no thought of ever becoming a spy. And even if I had one, I wouldn't have known, there was no phone number, no office. I wouldn't have known where to go and apply. You can't apply for the CIA. The KGB exclusively recruited. They came after you.
Welcome to Mindset Lessons from the Field. I'm Gina Cazazza, the author of the upcoming memoir, Training with a SEAL. Today's guest was once a deep cover KGB spy sent to infiltrate America. He lived a double life for a decade, reading people, mastering influence, and navigating high-stakes deception. When ordered back to Moscow, he chose a different path. Now he mentors top executives how to lead with integrity, outthink the competition, and stay 3 steps ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so excited for this one. Jack Barsky. Jack, thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you for giving me an opportunity of yet another interesting phase of my life. Okay, so
Oh my God, it's so interesting. I'm fascinated. Let's start there because let's start with, so our listeners know, what exactly is a KGB spy and how does one become one?
Well, the KGB was the intelligence service of the Soviet Union, the most powerful intelligence agency in the history of man. First of all, the Soviet Union was a much stronger power than Russia is today, 10 times stronger economically. But the KGB was the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, and police rolled all into one organization. So I was recruited by the espionage, by the sort of the CIA equivalent of within the KGB, called the First Directorate. Well, how does one become one? First of all, I never even had a trace of a dream that I ever wanted to be a spy. I had a great career ahead of me. I graduated with high honors with a master's degree in chemistry from a top university, and I was on my path to become a tenured professor. So joined the elite. I need to mention I didn't grow up in the Soviet Union. I was born and raised in Germany, East Germany. So no thought of ever becoming a spy. And even if I had one, I wouldn't have known. There was no phone number, no office. I wouldn't have known where to go and apply. You can't apply for the CIA. The KGB exclusively recruited. They came after you. I'm piecing all of this together because they didn't necessarily share a lot of information with me. They were like the CIA. They recruited in colleges, particularly for the espionage jobs for people whose personality was already mostly formed, but who didn't have a lot of roots yet in the country, like married children and so forth. So it so happened that one day I was a junior in college at that time, and I had a knock on my dorm door, and in came a person who introduced himself as a representative from a local factory, one of the few factories in East Germany that made really, really good stuff, high precision optical instruments. He wanted to talk with me about my plans after graduation. Now, that was the dumbest cover story I've ever heard in my entire life, because in those days in East Germany, people weren't recruited. We were assigned. This was a command control kind of society. Immediately when he said that, I knew he was lying, and I thought it was East German secret police, which, I wasn't afraid of him because, I had done nothing wrong. So I immediately thought, this is, they're recruiting for espionage. So then after a while, we would engage in some small talk, and then he abruptly changed the topic. By the way, this was one of the standard methods by the KGB, that you switch topics. Don't give somebody time to think about the answer. Small talk, and all of a sudden he said, I have to admit, I'm not really from the company. I'm with the government. Could you imagine to one day work for the government? And I didn't have to think very much. My answer was yes, but not as a chemist. So he got an answer to a question that he wanted to ask, but didn't have to ask. We were operating between the lines. We made an arrangement to meet again at a restaurant for lunch. And that's where he introduced me to a fellow he called Herman. Well, when Herman opened his mouth, he was no Herman. He was a German, which is a Russian version of his Herman name. But, that was his cover name. It wasn't his real name anyway. And then he disappeared. I knew that he said, Herman, and we're working with our Soviet comrades, quote unquote, KGB. I knew that. That was not recruitment. People think, well, at that point I was recruited. Oh, no, 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 no. They were looking particularly for very unusual individuals with a whole set of character traits that was necessary to survive as a lone wolf, deep cover person who works, lone wolf, does not work on a team, and has a whole bunch of character traits that I have them written down because I keep forgetting the details. I wanted to actually read them to you. This is what they were searching for. That doesn't make me a better person than the rest of them. It doesn't make me a worse person. It's just an unusual set of character traits that you could already probe for at my age. Quickness of intellect, high erudition, language abilities, bravery. That's already, I was born brave. I was born adventurous. Focus, quick response to fluid situations, parentheses, being able to come up with a lie to get out of a tough situation. It wasn't stated like that. I got this list from interviews that were given by a couple of heads of directorate, illegals directorate. When the KGB disappeared from view, they gave interviews to the press. So it was hardiness to stress, adaptation to completely new conditions of life. Now, and then I'm going to skip over that. Well-controlled inclination to adventure. Yay. That was me. Still is me. I get bored easily. Obviously, you had to have one foundation, and you had to be an ardent communist. The way they recruited based on ideology. And I was active in the Communist Party. I was a member of the party, and I was active in the communist youth movement at the university. And all the other things I just read you, Herman and I met once every other week, and he gave me tasks, and we talked about everything. He was like a father to me. My father had left me when I was 16 years old. So he got to know me really well. And eventually he wound up with a pile of documents that he sent to the headquarters in Berlin with a recommendation to recruit me. And that's when it happened, 18 months after I met him.
Wow. So what was he like giving you in terms of little like missions and stuff like that?
For instance, the one that made me the most uncomfortable, he gave me the address of a small house with the name of the people in there who lived in there. And he told me to find out about a cousin who lived in West Germany. And he didn't give me any other instructions, just find out. Well, how do you do that? So this is when you have to get creative. At the time, I sported a full beard, and I pretended to be a sociology student. The beard fit that kind of a subject. And I sat down and wrote up a questionnaire, and I rang the bell, and I said, I'm so-and-so, and I'm a sociology student, and I'm writing a paper. Would you kindly answer some more questions? Who says no to a student who asks that kind of a question? The lady was very nice. So, and I had arranged the questions in such a way that I would get closer and closer to the topic of the divided Germany. The fact that I regretted that I didn't have any relatives in the West, because the people who did, they got these parcels with goodies on a regular basis, and I never got bananas. So eventually, I just asked a question straight out. Do you have somebody in the West? This is really great, isn't it? She says, yeah. And so she spilled the beans, and she even told me when the cousin is going to come visit. He was a target for recruitment, and they wanted to know when he's going to show up. So that kind of, and another one was where Herman drove me around in the city, and he pointed to a building, and he said, find out who's in there and what they're doing. I did something else clever. They wanted for people who can be creative. There wasn't even on the list, but there was a bus stop next to that building. There was no signs. You wouldn't know who was going in and out. It was a bus stop, and it was covered. So I went there one day and left a briefcase there with my name inside and a couple of papers that were meaningless. If the briefcase was lost, too bad. A couple of days later, I went there, rang the bell, and asked if somebody found the briefcase. And then I knew I used what I didn't know I had at the time, but I think I had it in spades. I got the feedback from old friends of mine and people that knew me well way back when. I used my natural charm to become friends with the guy. And, Herman was really impressed with this. And the one thing about, adventurous person, what really impressed him was that there was not a task. At the end of our junior year in college, my best friend and I hitchhiked all the way from East Germany through 4 countries where we didn't speak the language, all the way to Bulgaria where we didn't speak the language, and there was no GPS, and we had limited amount of money. We slept outside multiple times, and we made it. Very few people dared to do that in those days. He probably said, man, this guy is ready to go someplace into, Neverland, never knowing what to expect.
Wow. It sounds like too, like you had to have a lot of intuition.
Yes.
And creativity to be able to just come up with these things so fast, and also catering there's no computer that's helping you write these questions.
No.
That's really, really impressive. Where did that come from? Like, how did you strengthen that?
That part of it is genetic. Okay.
Okay.
It cannot be taught from scratch. But
Okay.
you can inquire this by, purposely thinking about solutions when you don't need them right away. What happens, and I give a lot of credit to my subconscious, and everybody has a subconscious, and it's always active and it stores tons and tons of information, a couple of billion neurons in the subconscious. So whatever happens to you, whatever you're thinking about, the subconscious keeps a record. So, and that's how you can train your intuition to a degree and your creativity to a degree, because you're going to have a database to fall back on, and the subconscious is very quick. It happens to me on a daily basis now, particularly when I'm out running. I get my best ideas when I'm out running, and I'm not looking for the ideas anymore. My subconscious feeds me this stuff. And that is also a trait that can be given to you at birth, but can also be acquired purposely, and that's curiosity. It's huge. Always being curious about people, particularly I was and still am, but also about, how does this work? Taking in new information, by the way, and this is a psychological truth, curious people live longer and live a much more fulfilling life. And that's not me saying this. Is This is me reading up on psychology and confirming some of the ideas that I have as an amateur psychologist.
That's really fascinating. Was there any physical conditioning, or was it all mainly mental in terms of training?
So this is one of the answers that may disappoint your listeners. There was no James Bond type training. I spent 2 years in Moscow where they actually taught me how to drive a vehicle, preparation of surveillance detection by car. And we gave up on that because, I couldn't handle the traffic in Moscow, and then trying to find out if somebody's following me. The only training I got in something physical was self-defense, and not to fight with the FBI. During my spy years, I very often wound up in places where I could have been physically in danger, like parks, for instance. Self-defense training was for not becoming victimized by a robber, or not losing important things I had on me at the time. You go to a park to exchange documents, to exchange information that you leave in some kind of a container. This is called a dead drop. So self-defense, when I came to the U.S., every day I practiced the moves, and eventually I gave up on it. So no fast driving. This right hand, I'm right-handed. Never touched a gun. No weapons training either. My weapon was my brain.
Wow, that's amazing. So, but you'd mentioned, U.S. So let's segue there and let's talk about why you were sent to the United States and what you were supposed to accomplish.
Okay, no, first of all, they wanted to deploy me initially to West Germany. It makes kind of sense because, if you, as an illegal, you disappear in the crowd and you're not any different than the others, right?
Hmm.
But there was a requirement for everybody who was in espionage in the KGB to learn a second language. And they allowed me to pick the language, so I picked English. Turns out the person that speaks to you had much more of an accent. But first of all, I was very talented in acquiring a new language very quickly. And I had a talent for that. And then it turns out that with some phonetics exercise, I was able to get to a point where my accent was light enough so I could pass for a born American. When I came to the U.S. and pretended to have been born in New Jersey with a touch of an accent. But in New York, everybody has an accent. My
Yeah.
final
Yeah.
destination was New York City. Most people don't even bother to ask. And what helped me to answer questions if they came up was that I impersonated and still impersonate to the extent but now I'm saying I'm borrowing his identity because he doesn't exist anymore. I'm impersonated Jack Barsky, who was born at the age of 11. KGB was able to acquire a genuine birth certificate for Jack Barsky. Big security hole. Imagine that. Barsky's mother's maiden name was Schwartz. That's a German name. It could be Jewish, but it doesn't have to be. So anytime somebody says, you sound a little European, where are you coming from? Were you really born in the U.S.? I says, yeah, my mother was German and my dad died early in my life, so I grew up bilingual. Bingo. That again was a bit of creativity because the KGB didn't tell me that, but when I looked at the birth certificate, that's the way that I shut everybody down. So and you asked what I think it was also more focused on the tasks. Initially, I got some training to analyze documents, to be able to operate in the realm of foreign policy. Plan was for me to befriend individuals who make foreign policy or influence foreign policy. That was number one, but actually the true number one that was told me was to get to know as many people as possible wherever you operate and whoever you meet, to see if and profile them and see if they could be decent candidates for recruitment. And then, and this they didn't tell me, I found out afterwards, again in one of those interviews, the most important aspect of me being in the United for the KGB was me being in the United States, simply because illegals like me were an insurance policy. In those days, the end of Cold War, the two most successful spies for the KGB were moles, American citizens in the CIA and the FBI. And they interacted with spy diplomats. Other than illegals, all the other spies for the KGB were diplomats. There was a time when diplomatic relations could have been broken up, and that who would these moles have to interact with but us, the insurance policy? I was never given any instructions when the sleeper of me was supposed to be woken up and why. But it makes sense. And again, this was shared with the press, with the reporters, by ex-heads of the director of the S. So that's why
How old were you when what year did you actually move here? What time period was this?
I was 28 when I came here.
You were 28. Okay.
Yep.
Interesting. How was it when you first got here?
It wasn't a culture shock because they did one good thing. They sent me for 3 months to Canada to get an idea what it's like to live in an English-speaking society that's close enough to the United States. They didn't know that the closeness wasn't that close, but the culture shock was gone. So when I arrived at LaGuardia Airport and then took the bus to Manhattan, the only thing that surprised me, I was thinking, man, these roads are narrow. like, Madison Avenue, Fifth Avenue.
Yeah.
But then I realized that after having lived there for a while, they weren't narrow. It's just because the tall buildings that I wasn't used to were squeezing
Mm-hmm.
like the vision, and it felt like narrow. But other than that, I had been to department stores. I had eaten very good food in Canada, so none of that was a surprise to me. It was interesting, In the first year, I had no job to go to, so I spent every day exploring New York City. I got to know New York City than most people who live there. I took the train to every last stop, every train to every last stop, and walked around there. When it rained, I spent time in the movies. I watched a lot of TV because culturally, I had no knowledge of what is, for me to pretend to be an American by birth, I didn't know the names of the baseball players. Okay. I knew what a home run was, but, stealing bases and all this baseball, football, the favorite sitcoms, I had to acquire that knowledge. And it took about a year to get reasonably comfortable. And then it took some more time to get really comfortable, altogether about 5-6 years before I could interact with professionals like you and say, hey, I'm Barsky from New Jersey.
Now, during this time, you were working, right? Like that first year, you were
First year I
work.
wasn't working.
You weren't. You were
No.
just absorbing, and
I
then
yes, I pretended, I lived in a hotel where you pay by the month.
okay.
Uh,
Now, did
and
they pay for that though? The
yeah,
KGB
no, I had
every.
I had cash on me. I had enough cash, and I got another influx of cash in a dead drop operation. The first year I lived on KGB money, but I pretended to be working. So every morning, rain or shine, I
Mhm.
left I left the hotel at about 7:30, and I came back after 5. So I was either in the city or I spent time in the movies. My first job was actually a blessing. First of all, it wasn't easy to get a job without a record, without a resume. I couldn't take my chemicals knowledge with me. I had no documentation. And eventually, after a lot of research, I chanced upon an ad in a paper. They were looking for messengers. And I figured, messenger, that might be a good idea. Without getting too much into detail, I wound up actually becoming a bike messenger. Nobody asked me about any background. And bike messengers made a lot of money because, in those days, there were no bike lanes in Manhattan. It was an extremely dangerous job. It killed some people. And yet the bike messengers were the fastest means of transportation in Manhattan. The people on foot had to go in the subway and wait for a train and then walk again. The cars would, how slow they are in
Oh yeah,
Manhattan.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
us bike messengers, we were in high demand. So immediately after 1 year, when I got that job, I made enough money to take care of myself, rent an apartment, and normalize my existence. And what helped me there, I learned a lot about, American culture. When I was waiting for packages, we had a room where people were just waiting, and I just listened to the other guys, what they were talking about and what was important to them. So I absorbed a lot of culture without putting myself at risk, because nobody ever they didn't care about, they didn't ask anybody about anything. Most of us were transients. Some of them were maybe people who came back out of jail, and they were mostly messengers on foot. There were a couple of other guys on bike. That's how I became, learned how to not just speak like an American, but eventually live like an American. One more thing that had to happen, I went to college and I got a degree with a concentration in information technology, which got me a really, really good job at an insurance company. Add a little humor. I made a real big mistake in college. First, I got a high school equivalency diploma, and then I enrolled at City University, and I finished the program in 3 years with an A average. I had to give the graduation speech. That was not a good idea. for somebody who wants to like blend in and not be a standout. Felt Forum.
Oh.
4,000 people in attendance. I got really lucky that nobody from the staff at the college who knew that I had raced through that program in no time, and everybody had a problem doing it in 5 years. And nobody ever asked me, well, so how did you get here? Where did you come from? Because my backstory really wouldn't have worked very well, because according to my backstory, I spent most of my time upstate New York working on a farm.
So
There was significant danger involved in being a valedictorian.
yeah, I would say. And how was it though, living a double life? Like, how do you not let like fear and doubt control you? And did you ever have some fears and doubts while you were here?
No,
No.
that is now again, that was given to me at birth, and the fearlessness, the sense of adventure. One of the things that took some of the fear out of me was that, there was clearly a good chance that I would wind up in jail. But, I knew that because I grew up in the country, and I had to spend a lot of time growing up by myself. I didn't have playmates, so, I didn't have friends nearby, so I had to either do reading or I played board games by myself, whatever. We didn't have TV in those days. So I knew that I would be okay in jail as long as I have something to read and or write. And I also knew that the KGB would get me out. So because they had shown this to me and any other recruits by doing this. They were in the habit of doing this. And the other thing is, and I told you about being adventurous and being curious. Some of that fearlessness was acquired because curiosity and adventure, if you step into the unknown, everybody has this threshold, saying, should I do this? I mean, it's all these bad things that could happen. Well, if you make that very first step into your first unknown, and it works. Next time you encounter another unknown, you have a little more confidence. This can be acquired. It's just, the first time, people are wired to be fearful. That's our ancestry. If they hadn't been afraid of the tigers, then we wouldn't exist today.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing wrong with being fearful. But it can be overcome. And if you don't overcome that innate fear that you have, your life will be not as good as it could be. And, my life has been so interesting because I always
my God, so interesting.
Right? It's because I always tried something new. And then that included, oh, by the way, during my career in corporate America, I worked for 6 large companies. When I was a manager, I switched. I went from one industry to another, 3 different industry, 5 different cities. I moved a lot, and I managed technology that I didn't understand very well, and I didn't have to necessarily learn it. But this would have made a lot of people say no to that kind of step. And every time I stepped into another unknown, it worked. Because you gain confidence. And again, this is not, I can teach in a course. This is when I want to work with somebody, I'm just going to encourage them and say, listen, what's the worst that can happen? All right. And think about all the good stuff that could happen. And then, I show about my example. And I, the folks that I choose to mentor are already established in some way. You can't teach somebody to go from an average IQ to a genius IQ. I'm not saying you have to have a genius IQ to interact with me, but you have to be reasonably smart and well educated and have goals in life. You want to know where you want to go. That's really, really important. Because if you just play around and settle on the first job, I'm on LinkedIn a lot, and LinkedIn congratulates people for having been 30 years in the same job. Now, for crying out loud, how boring does it get? You know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking
Because
about.
when
Yeah,
you're talking to all kinds of different people, and that makes your
yeah,
life so interesting.
yeah.
Change is one of the essence of a good life. It doesn't mean you have to change all the time, but you settle
Right.
down for a while, and then if it gets to be routine, you may want to look at something else.
This podcast episode is brought to you by Thrivers Coffee. Podcast guest Nick McKinley's company, Deliver Fund, brings you guys Thrivers Coffee. It is ethically sourced, it's organic, and it supports traffic survivors. That is right. Thrivers Coffee is all about empowering us to making a difference in the fight to end human trafficking. That's why 100% of the proceeds go directly towards their goal of bringing freedom to victims of human trafficking. So if you guys love coffee that is organic, ethically sourced, and tastes absolutely delicious, and want to help to end the fight of human trafficking, check out Nick McKinley's company, Thrivers Coffee. Like that. I want to know, as a spy, like this is purely my curiosity, how do you read people quickly? Like, what are some big tells to like someone's weakness or strengths, or if they're lying or something?
All right, so this answer will seem to be unusual, but I have confirmation that, again, my idea here actually has scientific background. Let me first talk about reading people quickly. You can read books, you can take courses, but you will not be an expert. I give you an example. Most people think when I sit like this, that's a negative gesture. Not in my case. I just feel comfortable hugging myself. Okay. And if people, they're the obvious ones when people roll up their eyes, they're like, okay. And then there are the more subtle tells, like, where it's body language and facial expressions. I don't teach that. I could, but I would have to go to the book. Okay. And here's the thing. I have a really good friend who is an expert in body language. He was the head of the behavioral division in the FBI, and he will tell you to be really good at this.
Yeah.
You can't just read a book. To really be good at this, you can't just take a course. It takes a lot of training in a controlled environment. There's two reasons. One of them already I told you. Body language is not universal. I'll give you one odd example. In Bulgaria, when they do this, that means no.
Oh.
And when they do this, that means yes. And when they do this, means come here. I'm not exaggerating. It's true. So, and the other thing is, your body has a number of ways to send out signals. With the eyes, with the face, muscles, body language, and then you also talk. So to put this all together and make this into a perfect read, it's nearly impossible. But here's the thing that makes me really, really good at reading people rather quickly. And I call this subconscious pattern recognition. Again, it's attached to curiosity. And I'm talking about people now. As a child, I was always interested in people. When my parents and I went to a restaurant, I was reprimanded multiple times. Why are you staring? Stop staring at these people. And I was trying to figure out, what's the next move? Who's going to get up first? And are they getting along? And husband and wife and so forth. And I've always done that instinctively. And of course, when you operate as an illegal, to guess the next move of the individuals that you're interacting with, and that becomes a survival skill. You need to know who you really don't want to get close to, because they are, they're too curious or too smart and whatever. So this is how subconscious pattern recognition works, and it's a long-term thing. This is not a character trait. That's an acquired skill, but it takes a long time to acquire. So as you interact with people, your subconscious is constantly at work, and it stores prototypes, patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to do with what people wear, components of speech, what the words that they use, the pitch, the speed, pauses, and as well as facial expressions, all that. So what happens? So your subconscious has prototypes, and the moment I talk to somebody I just met, particularly when it comes to language, but also overall, within a few minutes, I come up with either thumbs up or thumbs down. It doesn't get any better. But when I hired in corporate, I made it all the way to the executive suite. Overall, I hired about 200 to 300 people. During my last few years, I stopped doing the standard HR interview. I just had small talk with these people. I wanted to find out, A, are they smart? B, are they honest? C, are they a good fit in the corporate culture? And C, IBCD, the fifth one was energy level. And that was either up or down. And I told them up front, if you can't do what's on your resume, the revolving door will rotate. And I tell you, I made one mistake doing that. And when I made that mistake, I allowed wishful thinking in my frontal lobe override my gut instinct. Gut instinct is real. And even people who haven't really started cultivating it the way I did have it. And you can trust your gut instinct, but you got to validate it. I fail occasionally. There are some people who can fool you. And a couple of times I really made a bad mistake and trusted people that weren't trustworthy because I didn't validate and I didn't have a contract with them. There are no real quick answers. There are no quick solutions. You have to want this. It helped me phenomenally well. Because nowadays I meet so many different people, and you can't be friends with everybody. There's not enough time. And
There's not enough time.
right,
Why yeah, I get it. And when you mentor people, what are some mental habits like that from like your spy days or from growing up and things that serve you in leadership and business?
let's just go down to and get rid of a fear of the unknown. The first step is the toughest one, but the most important one. You got to take it. So if you're already comfortable in a job, and you don't know if you have a career ahead of you, and you don't want to play the politics like others do, you feel unfulfilled, it's too much routine, well, then go out and test the job market. And God forbid you fail. We also learn from our failures. This is another thing. Failure, embrace failure. And you know how many times I failed since I became an entrepreneur? Like most recently. But you learn from failure. Now, obviously, you don't want to have a string of failures.
Yeah, no, I'm an entrepreneur. I get
But the bottom
it.
line is, when you do fail, you take a deep breath, you analyze, and say, okay, next step, what do I do now? Don't become a victim. Don't even a victim of your own flaws. Just don't, because there's always another day. And what's really important there is a habit that I have now for sure. Start the day with positive thoughts. Do not allow negativity pop into your head. Start the day, and I start the day with in meditation. I meditate about all the good things that I have that others don't have, and all the good things I'm still going to be doing even at my age. I'm looking forward to the next decade of my life, and maybe a few more years. Who knows? Positive thinking, that it's a mindset. That's key. And this doesn't develop overnight. So when I mentor people, and I actually recently started mentoring, believe it or not, a young lady who is not in corporate, but she's a very bright young lady, and she has a lot of negativity about her because of a very bad childhood. I'm trying to lead her in our interaction into the realm of goodness, positivity. What can all the things that she can do with the talents that she has and with the knowledge that she already has. And I can do this with everybody, and because I have that attitude now, okay? And I exude that optimism, and I think it's contagious to some degree. But again, the one thing I will not offer, because I would be lying, is like a quick fix. There are some quick fixes. And I tell you, the one that I had to take myself is when I reported to an evil boss who micromanaged me and gave me commands, instructions that were off the wall, dangerous to the company that we work for. I couldn't control my blood pressure. At that point, I had to, that was a quick fix, leave. And this is one of my favorite sayings. It rhymes. You got to know when it's time to go. And I'm not going to tell somebody who's really comfortable in their job to switch companies. It's very important. Two things. If the work that you do is fulfilling, it coincides with what you like doing and the talents that you have, and you have a really good relationship with your boss and your boss's boss. I mean, that's a situation that most people don't find themselves in. And then in that case, there's no reason to leave, and if there's still growth, you can project the future. Really don't have a lot of use for the human resource department, but I'm not going to go there.
Let's talk about the when you were ordered back to Moscow and what exactly that meant and what was going through your mind in that instant.
That was one of the most stressful periods in my life. Maybe about, I would say it was 3-4 months of stress. I found myself in a situation where I had married a young lady from originally from Guyana. When I first dated her, she was safe, okay? She was not born American. She couldn't have figured out that I wasn't 100% yet. She asked me nicely if I could marry her because she needs a green card. She was in the country illegally. I analyzed the situation. I had the documentation required, and I did some research, asked some people who sponsored females, and they told me about the process, and I said, okay, we can do it. But, once you got your green card, we're going to get a divorce. I'm not the marrying type. Well, she actually did something that is partially originally responsible for me being able to talk to you today, because she decided she wanted to hold on to me. I was a catch, so she got pregnant on purpose. I didn't know that, but a lot of women in her situation did that, and it worked really well. Well, it worked in my case. We moved in together, and before that, she lived in separate places because I couldn't afford to pay for their apartment and mine. So when I watched this little girl grow up, her name is Chelsea. Watching this girl grow up, I was not aware what happened to me. I was assaulted by a huge wave of unconditional love. This is the kind of love that you can't fight, and you can't rationalize it. And you don't, unconditional means you don't get anything back. The only thing that she could get me back is little baby talk and pretty eyes and just a good look. Mom would not have been able to take care of this girl. They would have wound up in a bad part of New York. And I had found no way. I knew that I had to go back to Germany because they told me 10 to 12 years and then you come back. There was a good reason for that, because the longer you stay, the more of a risk for defection you are. And I had not found any way to support these two from a distance. So when I got the signal, there was a signal on my way to work. It was a red dot the size of my fist. I saw that signal. It says, emergency, you got to come home right away. This struck me like a blow from a professional boxer in the head. What now? Because I had not found any solution to my dilemma. Well, I postponed the decision. I went to work, and I sat there all day and stared at my computer monitor and did nothing. And I analyzed back and forth, and there was no good solution one way or the other. I was in a dilemma. I was able to play for some more time because we communicated only with signals and through Morse code and letters. In that week, I got one radiogram in Morse code, and they told me, you got to come home. It said you are in danger of being arrested right away. And then they asked me to confirm that I got the radio signal, and I didn't. So the radio could have been broken. I could be in a hospital. So I still had some more time until they did something that was normally forbidden. They sent a guy. They knew which way I took to work. They sent a guy to see if I'm still there. And he found me on the subway. I was waiting for a train to Manhattan. He knew what I looked like. He came up to me and he whispered, "You got to come home or else you're dead." Now it was decision time. They knew that I knew that they knew. They commanded me to go to one of those dead drop operations, pick up an oil can that contained money to go to Canada with and a false passport. So now I had to make a decision. If I defy, they know that I'm about to defect, and that would have been severe danger, right? If I don't leave and be on my way to Canada and say hello to the diplomats there in the Soviet embassy, they know that I'm defecting. So I came up with this. This was my subconscious again. I came up with this brilliant idea. The decision that I made, by the way, was a gut. Logic said, I have to go. There was way too much danger over here and way too much good stuff over there. You know, I had dollar savings. They promised me a house. I would have come back a conquering hero. I had received the second highest decoration of the Soviet Union 2 years prior to that event. I was a hero, and everything that was good for my life. The Berlin Wall was still up, so I would have lived a good life in East Germany. Okay, so logically, I had to go. When these debt drop operation failed, when I was trying to pick up that oil can with the money, at that point I still hadn't made a decision, but I couldn't find an oil can. It was a failure. So as I walk out of the park, my subconscious tells me 3 words: I am staying. That was the dumbest decision based on logic I could have ever made. And it worked. Just talking about stress, for 3 months, I was concerned that one day the FBI will show up.
You didn't move. You kept the same job. You kept the same place. You didn't go and try and hide or anything like that?
Not hide, but there's a good question. I took the only action with regard to FBI. I took the only actions I could take, and also the KGB. And I just got to tell you, the other thing that my subconscious fed me was to tell him that the reason I'm not leaving, I'm not coming home. Okay, thank you very much, for your concern, but I am now infected with HIV/AIDS. The only place where I might be able to get treatment is in the United States, and I knew that the last thing they wanted to have somebody with AIDS in their country. So I was hoping that they would buy this. I had no clue that they would. So first of all, I did a lot of surveillance detection to make sure that the FBI is not after me. There was no sign, so that part of the pressure disappeared. Then I made sure you couldn't go hide. What do I had to take care of the child and the woman.
At what point did your wife know that
a
you're...
long time, much later.
Oh, okay.
When me and the FBI were already buddies. Yeah, I made sure that with regard to possibly subject to assassination, that I was never at the same spot at the same time. So I took different paths to work, and I took different paths on the way home, and I also changed the times. Because here's the thing, assassinations have to be planned. The individual who does harm to you, kills you, needs to have an escape route, okay? And it needs to be in a spot where there's not too many others who could witness this, right? For somebody to prepare an assassination, I didn't give him any kind of a route that they could investigate. Well, bottom line is, I didn't need to do that, but it helped me. If you're in a really stressful situation, at least I'm wired that way, and a lot of people are, the stress will disappear if you do something. If you don't do something, you're just going to be miserable and do this and sit in a corner and cry because something bad is going to happen to you. When you do something, you have at least hope that nothing will happen to you, and nothing did happen to you. And they believed the story. I found out that many, many years later because
The HIV story?
yes, they did.
No way.
Yeah,
Whoa.
they believed the story. They believed it instinctively and immediately because they went to my German family and told them that I had passed away. And she went to the German authorities and recorded that I was dead. And the German files, the German name that I carried is still listed as having passed away in 1988. So when I showed up back in Germany after many years, I was resurrected. A
Oh
lot
my
of the
God.
funny
So
aspects of my story, funny, little
when did
comfort.
like the stress I mean, I know you mentioned, as you're doing things, that you're not that helps, right, with the stress, but at
Absolutely. And that
what point
applies to,
like
by the way, that applies to anybody.
yeah.
Don't sit and mourn and be miserable and make the situation you're in imagination even worse than it is.
How many years did it take for you to know that like it's good, we're good, I can live
No,
my
it
life?
wasn't years. It was, and I told you about 3 months.
3 months.
When
Okay.
nothing happened in 3 months, I dropped all the bad thinking. I got rid of everything that had to do with my espionage activities. And I went to my German wife, who had asked me, "Can we buy a house?" I said, "Okay, let's save some money, and within a year we're going to buy a house." And I did, and we did.
Wow.
I was not going to say hello to the FBI. I was not going to defect. I was just going to disappear. I had another child, and at that point, I became a private citizen, working on my version of the American dream, knowing that I would never, ever see Germany again. That life that was ahead of me was going to be pretty nice, and it was, until the FBI
Wow.
showed up. That that was another stressful period.
How long from that did the FBI show up?
9 years after I went private, after I quit the KGB.
Okay, and how long did the FBI thing go on for?
They intercepted me on my way home, and we had an initial talk. I volunteered, right? But the moment they introduced themselves, and the details can be found on the internet. Don't want to get too much into detail because we're gonna run out of time.
Yeah, yeah.
If you Google my name or put my name on YouTube, you will find a lot of stuff that tells the story in more detail. I volunteered. I said, I understand that the only way for me and my family to get away out of this situation with the least amount of damage if I cooperate fully. I'm willing to do so. And so I spent a month, maybe 5 weeks, once a week, being interviewed about every detail that I could remember from childhood on, like very, very detailed. At the end of all of this, I had to pass a lie detector test. That period, that 4 to 5 months, was very stressful because there were no promises. So all I had was hope. The promise came after I passed the lie detector test, and they told me, "We decided to allow you to stay. No harm to your family. You're going to get a green card, and there's a way to citizenship."
Wow. Oh my God.
And
What-
that's when all of that tension left me completely, even though that double life had done quite a bit of damage. And a lot of that damage I was able to overcome by writing my memoir. And, coming out as the Humpty Dumpty is finally back together again.
Yeah.
Because I still, there's residues of that dual personality that I had created for myself. Is if somebody stopped in here right now and said something in German, I couldn't speak English to you. All of a sudden, because the German and the English parts of my brain, they're not really well connected. They both of them act instinctively. The same way when I speak English,
Mhm.
or when I speak German and somebody says English, I switch over. It's really, really weird. But that's minor compared to people who operate in this field in intelligence. A lot of them come away with PTSD. I don't have it. Now, the one thing that I now have that I didn't have is fear of my wife.
For our final question,
Yes, ma'am.
what's like the most valuable lesson that your life taught you about survival and success?
I love that question. The first time I was asked this question when I had a talk at Microsoft headquarters. A lady just about your age asked me the exact same question, and I wasn't really prepared for this. And I was thinking for a moment, and you will love the answer. Love conquers all, because that was true in my life. My fundamental principle in life these days, and I applied that as well during my management years in corporate, is treating people with a love that you have inside of you, even if they don't deserve it, because it's all about what's in here. That doesn't mean you can condone what bad people are doing. It's, again, what's in here. And that is stronger than any other emotion that I have. People like to be loved. You know that.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you so much, man. You were an interesting one. I love talking with you. You were fantastic. Thanks so much for being on my show. For everyone that's listening, please like, share, comment, subscribe, become a Substack member. It is completely free and it is for your benefit to help build your mental fitness and your resilience. And I guess I'll see you guys all next week. Thank you so much.